For this last exercise, we're going to add on to our game's background by incorporating the name of your game into its design. Now, we've already established a planet and a spaceship inside of this, so we want to make sure we're working in the same file that we've already done those in. The other thing we want to do is, if you haven't done so already, download the game lettering folder from the Moodle page and install one of these predefined fonts. The reason I've chosen these fonts is because they're nice and bold and they work well with the style for the game lettering that we have. So I want you to choose one of these for your overall design. Remember, to install the font, all you have to do is double-click the font and then choose Install Font to load it onto your computer if it's not loaded already. When we jump back into our design, to get started, I'm going to turn off visibility for all my other layers, and I'm going to add a layer on top and call this new layer the Game Name layer. Everything else is locked down, so I can work in the game name layer as the start so I don't accidentally erase anything else. The first thing we need to do is to type out the name of our game. Grab your type tool, click once in the center, and this will give you some default dummy text, and let's type out the name of our game. For my example, mine's going to be called Alien Invader. Remember, the name of your game may be something slightly different. And with it typed out, let's go ahead and change the color of it to something nice and bright, although later on we may change it to something else. I'll then use my selection tool, the black arrow, to click and drag and make it much larger to fill up our entire screen. Now, I've already established this as my font, but if you need to, go ahead and select your text and then go up to the characters at the top and find the font that you want to work in. In my case, I'm using the Bungie Regular as the font choice for my game design. Now, for this exercise, there's 3 things that I want to see done to your type treatment. I want to see a gradient overlay on all of the letters, a drop shadow, and also some form of outlining around all of the letters. Now, if you want to add more to this, you're certainly welcome to do so, and you're also welcome to change up and vary up the look and feel of your design, but as long as it has a gradient, a drop shadow, and an outline, those are the 3 things I'm looking for. To add a gradient overlay to my letters, I'm going to open up my Appearance panel. For this particular exercise, the Appearance panel is going to weigh very heavily into the overall design of our artwork. With our characters selected, you can see how our Appearance panel looks in that it shows us the characters and their default opacity. Just like with working on the buttons, you can also add multiple fill and strokes to the overall design that you have. So in our case, with our letters selected, let's add a new fill color to our character's design. By default, it's going to fill it in with black, so we can click on this fill and let's change it to some sort of gradient color scheme. You can choose one of the predefined gradients, and once it's done, you can open up your gradient panel and adjust the look and feel of that gradient. In my case, I want it to have more of a metallic kind of texture. So to do this, I can either find a metallic, or let's see if I can make one. I'll double click the swatch, and I know if I bring this in, and usually if it's got a lighter color, so this inner one would be nice and light, and then very quickly it fades back to a orange as well. The other thing you can do once you've got your gradient established is to use your gradient tool, and then with that tool you can click and drag and change up the starting and stopping point of your design. Now that that's established, all I've got to do is change up the location of each of my sliders and place it exactly where I want it to be. That's looking pretty good right there. With this done, now we can see if we can add a drop shadow and an outline around our object. I'm going to do the outline first. I'm going to return to my Appearance panel and close out my fill color. Now, instead of adding a stroke outline around my letters, I'm going to add another fill on top of it. So with the fill selected, let's create a new fill color. And I'm going to set this fill color to be something that's bright and distinct. So I'm going to choose hot pink for my example. Now what I want to do is to be able to place this fill color below my other gradient fill color. So click on that and drag below it. And so now my pink fill is hiding behind my gradient fill. With the pink fill selected, let's add an effect to it. Go up to Effects, choose Path, and we're going to offset the path. What offset path does is it looks at the vector outline of all of your shapes and it moves it over, it offsets it however far you want it to be. If I turn on preview, you can see this is taking all of the individual paths of the letters and shifting them off 10 pixels. If I was to bring it down, this would bring it in slightly. And so it gives kind of the same effect of an outline, except these objects are filled in completely. The reason why I want to use a fill is because this will later give me some more advantage of how I can move things around and do more with it than just having a simple stroke. I'm going to set my fill to be something nice and thick, about 4 pixels looks good. We'll say OK to that. The final thing I want to do is to add a drop shadow. But instead of having a drop shadow behind everything, I want to apply a drop shadow just behind the fill of our gradient. So I'm going to choose my gradient fill, and with that one selected, let's go up to Effect and choose Stylize and add a drop shadow to that one. Again, we can turn on preview and get an idea of what it looks like. Now you can see the drop shadow is being applied to the little outline that we have to it, and let's change up the offset and amount of blur that it has. If I bring my blur down, let's choose something really small like 4 pixels. Now you can start to see it really show up behind there and on top of my little outline. Additionally, you can play around with the color of it, so if you don't want to have a black outline or a black drop shadow, maybe we can change it to something that's closer in the bluer family. And also play around with the opacity, making it larger or whatever. We can then say OK to that. Now I've got my letters set exactly the way I want them to be. The final thing we can do is to go through and change up the look and feel of all of our fills. You can add more drop shadows or more fill colors or more outlines, whatever you see fit. But those are the 3 things that I want to see applied to this particular exercise. To give you an idea of some extra things you can do to your type treatment, I'm going to select it again. I'm going to go down to my purple fill that I have and click and drag it to the new fill swatch, and this makes a copy of it directly on top of what we have. This not only copies the color, but it also copies that little offset that's there. Now I'm going to work on the one that's below, and I'm going to change the offset of it. So with clicking on the offset, let's make it slightly larger. Make sure preview is turned on so I can see it. That looks good. We'll say OK to that. And I'm also going to change the color of it just so I can distinguish it from the other bright pink that's there. We'll say OK to that. So now check out what I have. I have a darker color but's behind the lighter purple on top of it. With it still selected, let's say I wanted to offset this fill color. If I went up to Effect, down to Distort and Transform, and chose Transform, this would allow me to move and scale the fill color that I have selected. In my case, I'm going to turn on preview. I'm going to move it slightly to the left 4 pixels and also slightly down 4 pixels. This is taking the existing letters and that outline of the fill and moving it and offsetting it just a little bit. Maybe I'll do it for 3 pixels instead of 4. When I'm done, I can say OK. And this is the effect that I have. So far it's looking pretty good. And I can add more and more effects as necessary. Just make sure your type is selected. In my case, let's add a simple outline that's going around the entire thing. I'm going to choose my very bottommost fill, click and drag down to New Fill so it makes a copy of it. And I'm going to work on the one that's below all of them. So I'm going to click on Offset Path. With this one, we'll turn on Preview. And let's make it slightly larger and say OK. I'll change this fill color to something noticeable. So maybe this particular color will be more of an orange or a golden. That looks good. And again, I can open up Transform and move that around, or I can open up the opacity and change the blending mode just for that particular layer. In this case, setting it to difference. The advantage of doing this kind of work is that it's still a type layer. So I can choose my type tool, and if necessary, I can go in and change up the letters. So I could change this to Robot Invaders. With Robot, now that's done. Additionally, I can go over to my Styles panel and be able to save this up as a style. Once we've got this set, the next thing we want to do is to warp and alter our text so that it looks a little bit more dynamic and not just straight across the way we see it. So with our text selected, let's go up to Object, down to Envelope Distort, and choose Make with Warp. With Make with Warp, when you turn on the preview, you get an idea of different styles that are predefined in Illustrator. You can do things like simple arcs. You can arc just the upper part of it or the lower part of it. You can do different kinds of effects, and it'll apply it to the overall shape, and it'll keep the same blending and style layers that's in your appearance as well. For mine, we're going to keep it something relatively simple. Maybe I'm going to turn on a flag. You can also play around with the bend to see how much you want it to warp one way or the other, and you can distort the horizontal or vertical scale of something as well. Just pay close attention that everything is nice and readable. You don't want to warp it so much that it's no longer legible or readable for your game's design. Once you've committed to it, you can say OK, and you can see it's inside of this envelope. From here I can make it larger, I can still stretch it out, and it's still nice and editable. At any time, if I need to change up the way this is warped, I can always go back to Object, Envelope Distort, and choose Reset with Warp. Or if I need to edit the contents of what's inside of this envelope, I can choose to edit the contents, and this will allow me to choose the text inside of it and change up colors and design spacing for this. I'm going to go back to my Envelope Distort and choose Edit Envelope to go back to normal. Now that we've got our type, let's go back up to our Layers panel and turn on our spaceship and also our planet. I'm going to place my spaceship layer on top of my game name layer so I can see it and move things around so that it fits well within an overall design. Keep in mind, for your game sprites design, you're going to have all of your levels down at this lower third, so I want to keep this relatively open and have my name kind of situated up at the top. In my case, I'll also scale down my spaceship so I can read it. I don't want it to take up too much room. And maybe I'll reposition my name and planet so that it fills up that without taking up too much room elsewhere. And there you have it. Now I've got my background design nice and saved. For now, I can go up to File and Save, make sure the entire game frame is selected, and for the rest of your project, you're going to be creating other artboards to create your other game sprites. This is just going to be the background for your main frame's game design.